The cry was faint at first, almost drowned by the wind moving across the flat land. It carried low, muffled, as though pressed deep into the earth. The man paused on the path, listening. A second sound followed, weaker, and it drew him toward the edge of the flooded field where the ground had softened after days of rain. The air smelled of wet soil, heavy and clinging, and the reeds bent under their own weight. There, in the middle of a shallow pit, a dog lay half submerged. Her body trembled with exhaustion, her chest heaving against the thick mud that pinned her down. Each attempt to rise only pressed her deeper until she stilled, sides shaking with the effort of holding on. The water around her rippled faintly. Her movements reduced to tiny spasms of muscle and will. The man stepped closer, careful with his weight, knowing the land itself could betray him. The mud here was not soft earth but a trap, layered in water and clay. His boots sank slightly at the edge and he stopped, gauging the distance. The dog lifted her head, eyes wide and bright despite the grime. It was the only sign of hope left in her. She gave a low whimper, almost a whisper of sound. Her ears tilted forward, but her body refused to follow. Every part of her was coated in a sheen of mud, turning her once-lit shape into something heavy and foreign. She tried again to move her foreleg, and the earth tightened around it, sucking it down. The fight had drained out of her, leaving only that gaze, fixed on him, sharp with both fear and a quiet plea. The man knelt, lowering himself so as not to tower over her. He spoke softly, letting the tone settle more than the words. "Easy now. I see you." His voice traveled across the water, and she shifted her head slightly, nose twitching. The small movement cost her, the tremor in her chest deepening as she sank fraction by fraction. Around them, the field held its silence. Even the birds kept their distance, their calls muted from higher ground. The dog's breathing filled the stillness, shallow but quick, each exhale a faint shiver of mud and air. The man pressed his palm against the damp earth, testing its hold. He knew he could not rush. Every sudden movement would stir the pit, making it worse. He leaned forward again, studying her body. The hind legs were buried almost to the haunches, the tail plastered flat. Her shoulders showed only in uneven ridges above the surface, and the front paws barely twitched. She had likely fought for hours before the weight overcame her. Now she was suspended in a fragile balance, still able to breathe, but only just. The man reached out, not to pull, but to let her see his hand. The dog's nostrils flared, catching the scent through the veil of mud. Her eyes flickered, not in panic but in recognition of something outside her struggle. A faint whine broke the air, the sound of surrender mixed with trust. He held still, letting her adjust, letting her decide not to resist. The field carried their quiet exchange, a man kneeling at the edge of the trap, a dog sinking in silence but holding on with her gaze. For a long moment, nothing moved except the trembling of her body. Then, slowly, she let her head drop lower, resting against the muck, but her eyes never left his. It was the only signal she could give, and he understood. The man rose carefully, mud tugging at his boots as he stepped back to find a safer way in. The cry that had drawn him here still echoed in his ears, softer now, but no less urgent. The rescue would not be easy. Yet in the faint light of those eyes, buried but unbroken, lay the promise that she was not ready to give up. The man edged forward, each step sinking him deeper into the slick ground. The mud clutched at his boots, heavy and unwilling to let go, but he moved with care, never rushing. The dog's head lifted slightly, eyes tracking his every shift, torn between the instinct to flinch and the faint stir of trust. Her ears twitched as his voice carried across the damp air, quiet and steady, offering no threat. "Easy now," he murmured, the sound almost lost in the soft rustle of reeds. The dog's body trembled, a subtle shiver that rippled through her frame. The mud swallowed each movement, turning them into near stillness, but her chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. Her paws pressed weakly against the weight holding her, claws scraping without purchase. For every effort she made, the pit answered with silence and resistance. She lowered her head again, nostrils flaring as if to test the scent of the stranger edging closer. The man stopped a short distance away, careful not to let his shadow fall across her. He knelt low, so the line of his body seemed less imposing, and stretched his hand out across the surface. It hovered there, palm open, fingers loose, not reaching far enough to frighten, only far enough to be seen. The dog's eyes fixed on it, unblinking, as though the shape of his hand was something she needed to study before deciding whether it meant harm or help. The mud around him released a faint suction with each shift of weight. He could feel how easily both of them could be caught if he pressed too hard into the soft ground. His patience was all he could offer for now. The silence between them carried weight, broken only by the faint whine the dog let out, a sound of uncertainty, of worn-down fear. He lowered his voice again, no louder than the sigh of water. "It's all right, girl." At the sound, her ears angled forward. One paw twitched, and for a moment she tested the space between them, moving her muzzle slightly toward him before sinking back into stillness. Her eyes softened but held the edge of watchfulness, an animal's instinct to survive even when exhaustion pressed against it. The man leaned closer, his hand brushing against the damp air above the mud. He did not touch her, not yet. He waited, allowing her the choice. Slowly, she tilted her head, nostrils quivering as if searching for something familiar in the scent. Another low sound left her throat, gentler this time, a whimper that faded quickly into breath. The dog's body gave a sudden weak jerk as if she had considered one last struggle to free herself. The mud held firm, pulling her down again, and she stilled with a deep shudder. The man let his hand remain steady, unflinching, until at last her gaze broke from panic. She blinked once, long and slow, her chest heaving. It was the smallest of signals, but it was enough. He shifted slightly closer, the mud drawing at him with every move, and positioned himself where his reach could matter. The dog followed the line of his arm with her eyes, then let her head drop forward, resting briefly on the muck before lifting again. The man understood the rhythm of her surrender, not giving up, but letting him share the weight of her struggle. The field around them remained hushed. Water lapped faintly against reeds, and the air carried the damp scent of rain-soaked earth. Between them, the space had changed. No longer the distance between a trapped animal and a cautious rescuer, but a narrow bridge of fragile trust. The man did not rush to take hold. He let the moment stand, hand extended, body lowered, until her gaze steadied on him once more. The dog's ears twitched forward again, and her breathing slowed just enough to show she had accepted his presence. For now, that was the only step either of them could take, and it was enough to begin. The man inched closer, mud tugging hard at his boots, each step a slow negotiation with the ground. His body leaned forward, careful not to stir the pit more than necessary. The dog's eyes followed him, wide and rimmed with exhaustion. Her chest rose in short bursts and her nostrils flared against the weight of the muck that pressed around her. She shifted weakly when he reached for her, a faint tremor running through her body, but her strength was fading too quickly to resist. He carried a coil of rope across his shoulder, its fibers darkened with dampness. Lowering himself to one knee, he spoke softly, letting the sound of his voice move like a steady current across the space between them. "You're almost there." The words were quiet, almost lost in the stillness of the field. The dog's ears flicked, catching the tone more than the meaning, and she gave a low whimper that blended with the sigh of water nearby. The man slipped the rope forward, working it beneath her chest where the mud pressed hardest. The dog's body stiffened at the first touch, a quick, sharp inhale lifting her head for a moment before it fell again. He paused, his hand steady, waiting for her to settle. Her breathing came ragged, but the tremors in her body eased little by little. He pulled the rope gently, careful not to tighten too fast. The suction resisted with every move, as though the ground itself had no intention of letting her go. When he leaned back, the mud clung, pulling against the rope and her body with heavy reluctance. The dog whimpered again, her head straining upward, but his low murmur steadied the moment. "It's all right." His words lingered in the damp air while his strength held the line. Bit by bit, the rope shifted her weight, loosening the grip that pinned her down. The mud gave a wet groan as suction released in tiny increments, the sound of earth surrendering slowly. The dog's forelegs moved fraction by fraction, paws twitching as she found a sliver of space beneath her chest. She gasped as her head lifted higher, a shuddering breath rushing through her, raw but free. Her ribs heaved, filling with more air than before, and her nostrils flared wide. She coughed softly, a spray of mud leaving her muzzle. The man held firm, drawing her forward with patience, never letting haste risk the fragile balance. Her body shifted with each pull, a battle measured not in strides, but in inches. The dog's eyes, once wide with panic, began to steady as she clung to the rope's support. Her ears trembled forward, then back, the indecision of instinct caught between fear and fragile trust. She no longer fought against him, but let the rope guide her. Each breath she managed grew deeper, the whimpering fading into quiet panting as the pressure eased. The man leaned his weight back further, his muscles straining against the drag. Mud sucked at both of them, but the line held, and slowly her shoulders lifted free. The surface broke with a heavy splatter, and her front legs slid forward, dripping, raw, but released from their prison. She pressed them shakily against the surface, paws sinking again but finding just enough purchase to hold her chest above the mire. The moment stretched, fragile and heavy with silence. The man steadied himself, breathing hard, the rope taut in his hands. The dog lifted her head one last time, higher than before, her muzzle pointed toward the air. For the first time since he had found her, she could breathe without fighting the ground beneath her. The final pull broke the mud's hold. The rope slid free with a wet snap and the dog's body lurched forward into the man's arms. She collapsed against him, limp with exhaustion, her fur slick and heavy with mud. Her chest heaved, drawing in air that rattled through her throat. For a moment she did not move beyond that, eyes closed, head pressed weakly against his sleeve. His arms tightened around her, not in force but in quiet support, holding her as the trembling ran through her thin frame. He crouched there, breathing with her, both of them marked by the pit they had just escaped. The mud clung to his clothes, streaked across his hands and face, but his focus never shifted. He bent his head slightly, whispering low, "You're safe now." The words were not meant to change her, but to fill the silence with something steady. Her ears twitched faintly at the sound, and her tail gave one weak flick against the air before falling still. The dog's eyes opened again, not wide, but enough to catch the light of the fading sky. She coughed softly, mud spattering her muzzle, and shifted in his arms. Her ribs lifted with more strength than before, and she gave a shallow whine, not of fear, but of something searching. The man followed her gaze as it tilted toward the reeds lining the pit. He thought at first it was only instinct, the natural pull of an animal looking for ground. But then the reeds trembled. From the shadows between the stalks, a small shape emerged. Its movement was uncertain, unsteady, each step dragging as though the weight of mud pressed against its tiny body. A puppy, no more than weeks old, stumbled forward, its dark coat streaked with soil. It gave a thin cry, high and weak, before collapsing briefly on the damp earth. The man's breath caught as he realized the truth. This mother had not been trapped alone. The dog stirred in his arms, shifting with a faint push of her paws. Her body trembled again, but the sound she released was different now. A low moan that carried outward. From the reeds another shape appeared, then another. Two more puppies, smaller still, waded weakly through the shallow edge of the flooded ground. Their legs wobbled beneath them, and their cries blended. Fragile but insistent, cutting through the hush of the field. The man remained crouched, arms still around the mother, his eyes fixed on the sight of these new lives pressing forward. The dog lifted her head, every ounce of her strength focused on them. She whined again, softer, coaxing. The pups responded, dragging themselves with determination toward her voice. Their bodies, soaked and muddied, glistened under the dim light, their steps clumsy but urgent. One by one, they reached the ground near his boots. Their tiny paws pressed into the mud, slipping, but they pressed closer until their noses touched the air between them. The mother's head lowered, muzzle brushing weakly against the first pup. Her tongue flicked across its fur in a trembling attempt to clean. The puppy squealed and pressed into her chest, its body small against her larger frame. The other two soon followed, crowding into the hollow of her belly, their cries softening as they felt her warmth. The man stayed silent, overwhelmed by the quiet revelation. What he had believed was one life held in the balance had become four. He steadied the mother as she shifted, letting her collapse fully onto her side so the pups could settle against her. Their bodies burrowed into her fur, muddy tails flicking faintly, tiny mouths nuzzling, guided by instinct. She exhaled, long and heavy, her chest finally releasing the strain she had carried. For a moment, the field was filled only with the sound of breathing, the labored rhythm of the mother, the quick, shallow gasps of her young, and the man's steady breaths grounding them all. The air carried the scent of wet earth and reeds, mingled with the warmth of life returned. He let his hand rest on the mother's shoulder, not pressing, only resting there in quiet solidarity. She did not flinch. Her eyes closed briefly, then opened again, fixed on her pups. The tremor in her body remained, but she no longer carried the weight of despair. Each small cry from her young stitched strength back into her. The man leaned back slightly, giving her space, yet he could not take his eyes from the sight of the pups gathered against her. 3 tiny bodies, fragile and slick with mud, clung to their mother's warmth in the growing cool of evening. The unbelievable had revealed itself not in the drama of the rescue, but in the quiet persistence of life hidden until now. The reeds swayed gently around them, touched by a light wind. The last edge of the sun glowed faintly across the field, gilding the damp earth. The man remained still, his hands heavy with mud, his breath quiet as he watched the family begin to knit itself together again. The dog's eyes closed once more, her muzzle resting across her young. The puppy's whimpers faded into silence, their small sides rising and falling in fragile sleep. He knew the rescue was not yet finished. Their bodies still carried weakness, their future uncertain. But in this moment, as the day dimmed, he allowed the sight to stand on its own. A mother once trapped had been freed, and with her, 3 small lives had stepped from the shadows. The man stayed close but let the family press into one another. The air grew cooler and the reeds whispered in the wind. In that stillness, he felt the weight of the unbelievable not as shock, but as quiet truth. Sometimes one life carries many. The air had cooled by the time the man shifted to rise. His arms, sore from the pull of the rope and the weight of mud, steadied the mother as she tried to push herself upright. Her body trembled with effort, but her eyes remained fixed on the 3 small pups pressed to her belly. The man understood she would not leave them, so he waited, offering his support only when she wavered. Slowly, with pauses between each motion, the mother struggled to her feet. Mud slid from her coat in heavy clumps, streaking the ground beneath her. The puppies whimpered at the change, confused at the movement of her body, but their cries softened again when she bent to nuzzle them, ensuring they remained close. The man gathered the pups carefully, cupping their fragile forms against his chest. Their bodies were cold, slick with damp earth, but their tiny hearts beat against his palms. They squirmed weakly, releasing faint cries that carried across the quiet field. The mother followed closely, her steps uneven yet determined. Her eyes locked on the bundle he carried. Every muscle in her body seemed to ache, but still she pressed forward, unwilling to let distance separate her from her young. The ground was treacherous, each step sinking into patches of soft earth. The man moved with measured pace, guiding them toward higher ground where the reeds gave way to firmer soil. His boots dragged through the mud, clumps clinging to them until each step grew heavier. Yet he pressed on, his breathing steady, careful not to jar the puppies cradled against him. Behind him, the mother faltered, her legs stiff with fatigue, but the faint whimper of her young drew her onward. She stumbled once, catching herself with a deep groan, but rose again and followed. When they reached the edge of the flooded pit, the land began to change. The water receded into narrow rivulets and the earth grew more solid underfoot. The man paused, lowering the puppies onto the ground just beyond the softest patches. They squirmed against one another, muzzles rooting instinctively, their cries weaving into a fragile chorus. The mother approached at once, her head low, ears tipped forward. She pressed her nose against each pup in turn, licking the mud from their coats with slow, deliberate strokes. The sound of her rasping tongue filled the silence, matched by their tiny whimpers that gradually eased into softer breaths. The man stepped back slightly, watching. The family huddled together on the firmer earth, their bodies touching, their warmth pooling into one another. The puppies nosed their way beneath her chest, seeking milk they could barely find in her weakened state. But they clung to her nonetheless, comforted by the steady rise and fall of her ribs. She lowered herself onto her side, her body trembling with the effort, and curled protectively around them. Her tail, heavy with mud, brushed faintly against their tiny forms as though to shield them from the cool air. The sky shifted as the sun fell lower. Pale gold light stretched across the field, catching in the reeds and scattering shadows along the water. The man stood still, mud coating his arms and chest, the smell of damp earth heavy around him. His work was not yet done. These lives were fragile, their future uncertain, but in this moment the quiet was enough. The dogs had found ground that would not swallow them, and for the first time that day their breaths carried into the evening unbroken. The mother's eyes lifted to him once, steady but weary. She did not rise again, did not move closer, only watched as he stood at the edge of their small circle. The faint sound of her pups nursing broke the silence, their soft whimpers fading as they pressed tighter into her belly. She lowered her head slowly, eyes half closed, but her ears remained pricked, alert to every movement near her young. The man crouched nearby, careful not to intrude but ready to steady her if she faltered again. His hands rested on his knees, mud drying into dark streaks. He could feel the ache in his muscles, the pull of fatigue across his back, but it mattered little now. The scene before him, the fragile family pieced back together on solid ground, was what had carried him through the struggle. For a long time, he stayed that way, watching the mother regain fragments of strength as her pups quieted into stillness. They no longer cried, but lay pressed against her side, their small bodies rising and falling in a fragile rhythm. The mother's breathing slowed, though the tremors in her legs did not yet ease. She shifted once, curling tighter around them, her tail sweeping across their backs as the last of the day's warmth faded from the air. The man finally pushed himself to his feet, every joint stiff with effort. He took a step back, giving them space, though his eyes never left the small cluster of lives huddled on the earth. The mud clung thickly to him, streaking his clothes and skin, a reminder of the pit that had tried to hold them all. But it did not matter. What remained was this: 3 tiny pups and their mother, alive, breathing, bound together beneath the fading sky. The light dimmed further, the horizon painted in hues of orange and pale purple. The reeds whispered as the wind moved gently through them. The man remained a few steps away, still enough that his presence did not disturb the fragile calm that had settled over the animals. He let the moment stand as it was, quiet, steady, and unbroken. The mother's eyes closed at last, her muzzle resting across her front paws. The puppies shifted faintly against her, tiny squeaks escaping before they too settled into sleep. Their breaths blended into hers, forming a rhythm that carried across the ground. The man drew a slow breath of his own, heavy with earth and water, and released it quietly into the cool air. He did not reach for them again. He did not need to. They were together now, sheltered on solid ground, their strength returning in the hush of evening. He turned slightly, his eyes sweeping once more across the reeds, the pit, and the stretch of land beyond. Then, with mud still clinging to him like memory, he stepped back and let the wind carry the silence forward. The last light touched the edge of the field, fading into dusk. The small family lay close, their fragile warmth holding steady beneath the sky. And as the day gave way to night, the man stood still, carrying the quiet image with him. The mother and her young pressed into one another, safe, as the wind moved softly through the grass.